some softball pitch.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything Fast Pitch. We're going to continue our mini pod series for the summer and continue a discussion we started a couple of years ago when we talked about what was right with the world of travel ball and what's wrong with the world of travel ball. I did a series of articles for our website and also for Facebook where we kind of listed and broke down and wrote about all the things that are wrong and all the things that are right. All the things that are wrong side of the argument got a lot of reaction, and one of our listeners had a list of things that he thought I missed that also deserved to be on the what's wrong with travel ball side of the ledger. So he sent in some suggestions, and I'm going to tackle those discussions here in the next couple of weeks. So number one is pickup players. Coach Don and I have talked about the concept of pickup players in the past, and for the most part, I think we would agree that it's always best for a team to play with the players that are already on the roster. Hopefully, we've done a good enough job of developing our depth and developing the flexibility within the roster that we've got kids that can cover positions when somebody's hurt or somebody's sick or whatever happens that a player might need to move to a different spot. Now, there's a couple of situations where I think the argument for picking up players makes a little bit more sense. I'm still not a fan of it, but I can certainly understand if you're going into a tournament or going into a situation and your pitching is lacking. So let's say your number one pitcher's out of the rotation for whatever reason. Your number two pitcher's pretty good, but you don't really have anybody else behind that number two pitcher to step in and help your team be competitive. Because pitching is so specific and not necessarily something that you have a lot of other players on your roster capable of doing. In that situation, picking up a pitcher sort of makes sense to me and something that I think we can defend to the other people on the roster as long as we're being honest with everybody about what's going on. Now, in that situation, I would still do everything I can to be loyal to the pitcher who was already on our roster and make sure that she was featured as much as possible. But obviously, pitching is a place where we're going to have enough depth to get through a tournament. Obviously, if we're explaining to the other players on our roster, to the parents and kids, that if we don't pick this pitcher up, none of us get to play, then the idea of a pickup in that situation makes a little bit of sense. And so I think the key to making that work, number one, is communication. Number two is still being as loyal as you can to the players that are on your roster. The other time where I think picking a player up can make some sense is if we're looking at filling a spot on our roster. So we're asking a player to pick up with the thought that that's sort of extended tryout. It's a chance for them to show that we really want to add them to our team. Again, if we're communicating this with everybody else that's on the roster, then I think it's something that you can sell. If we're not communicating that with everybody else on the roster, then I think we're creating problems. And again, the idea of tryout via picking up is something that I think makes a lot of sense. But again, we need to make sure that we're communicating that. Outside of those two circumstances, I have a really difficult time defending the idea of picking players up. And I see it happening all the time. I hear complaints from kids that I work with and their parents all the time that their coaches are so worried about winning every game, every tournament, that they're constantly picking up players that they think are going to be better than who they already have on the roster. And to me, I think that's a real problem. So coaches, if you feel like you need to get better players, because the team that you assembled isn't strong enough to win, isn't strong enough to be successful, that's on you. And you trying to fix it on the fly by picking players up to me is a little bit hard to defend. I think what we really need to be spending more time on from a coach's perspective is developing the players we have, expanding their skills, expanding their ability to play different positions, making sure that they have the knowledge and the confidence that if somebody has to move into the shortstop position, if somebody's got to move into center field, if somebody's got to take on a bigger role on the team, that we've done a better job and done a good job of preparing them so that it's not a big drop-off. Now, I know sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. But again, if you're picking players up to fix things that you messed up as a coach, I get why it happens, but it's really hard for me to defend that to the other players on the roster. If you're on a team where your coach is constantly trying to fix their mistakes by picking players up and changing the roster and adding players at the last minute to try to fix the team, then I think in the future that's a pretty strong statement about whether or not that might be the right team for you moving forward. But so coaches, we need to do a better job of developing our players. We need to have a little bit more forethought in what we're doing when we put our rosters together, so that we've got a little bit more flexibility in the options that we're going to need when things go sideways during the course of a season. So as you can tell, I'm not a fan of pickup players. There's a couple of circumstances where I think you can defend it a little bit, but overall, I think we need to do a much better job from a coaching perspective on developing our players, getting them ready to play. As my grandfather would have said, you should dance with the girl you take to the prom. So that's going to wrap up this episode. Please make sure you still support our sponsors, the Anderson Bat Company, Bittinger and Styles, EAS, Elite Sporting Goods, Pinnacle Power Bars, Action Coach, and Mule Tech. Make sure you go to the website, order your Square Cuts training discs there. It's fastpitchprep.com. You can order your Square Cuts training discs there. You can also find this series of blogs that I wrote about what's right and what's wrong with softball. So if you're interested in this as a topic, there's a whole bunch of information there for you. Also want to make sure that you reach out to us, as this listener did, with questions, ideas, and suggestions. And please, let's keep the Player of the Week nominations rolling in. We'll be getting back to the normal everything fast pitch routine here shortly, and we'd like to have a nice backlog of Player of the Week nominations to recognize. So that's going to wrap up this mini pod. We'll talk to you again soon.